about that 21st birthday. The same year that the Queen lost her position as head of state in South Africa, apparently she was photographed dancing with President Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana during the state visit honoring the country's independence. Yeah, that particular image seemed to have offended white South Africa at the time, as it clearly demonstrated the Queen's opposition to apartheid.
We you know, at the time we obviously were not allowed to consort, as they were calling it at the time. So, you know, it's a pity. It's a pity, but South African apartheid. And I'm sad actually that the Queen had never really stood up a lot against apartheid and spoken out, spoken out against it much more vociferously.
Yeah. Broadcaster Redi Tlhabi from the BBC World Service joining us now on the line. Redi, good evening and thank you very much for your time and for joining us on In Focus. Yeah, under such circumstances, what's the mood in London and in the Britons? How are they feeling?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm not in the streets of London at the moment, but I did drive through to Buckingham Palace early in the afternoon before the news officially broke. I think that the message was already filtering through, especially when word got out that the doctors had expressed concern about her health and had asked her family to come through. And at that time, word got out and the streets were starting to fill up. The sirens were loud out in the streets. And of course, Buckingham Palace is a tourist attraction. So even people who were just in London on holiday just came through to observe the moment. And right now, flowers just being dropped right outside Buckingham Palace. And I'm sure all other symbols of British nationhood will also observe this moment. So what would I say about the mood? I think at 96, Thabo, we have to yield to nature, to God, those who believe in God, to just the next phase of life, and also the longest serving monarch, as you've just said. And she was beloved here in the UK and across the UK. There's, of course, the complexity of history that you've just been talking about, and maybe we can delve into that vision, the enormity of history, and an acknowledgement that whatever people's positions are on the British monarchy, she was a colossal figure who led a very significant life.
Now, the British Broadcasting Corporation, for which you work for, which is the national broadcaster, has obviously got a lot of content planned for this moment, which was planned long before time. Could you tell us some of the things that I suppose that will be carried by the national broadcaster during at least the next 10 days?
Okay, so I must just make a significant correction that, in the UK, they specifically call it the public broadcaster, as we should also at home. There's just something about state broadcasting and national broadcasting that creates a lot of political connotations. But of course, you are absolutely correct. This is the broadcaster for Britain, but it is looked more as an international broadcaster touching different corners of the world. I think that the BBC has a special proximity to the monarchy. There are special correspondents who report on the monarchy. There are historians who are contracted to the BBC who have written about and have broadcast about the monarchy. So those are the voices that you will hear for the next couple of days up until the burial of the Queen. And then, of course, there is the sense of history going into the archives around her coronation, around the time when her father died, and also the new king, of course, who's now King Charles. So there are all sorts of procedures and pageantry. There's a lot of pageantry and rituals that come at a time like this. Flags flying at half-mast. And just like, Thabo, you and I have been there before, or with the passing of Nelson Mandela. If you recall, in a lot of our broadcast was spontaneous, but it wasn't. I know that the public broadcaster, the SABC, and Talk Radio 702, where I worked at that time, ENCA, and I know Newzroom Afrika is a very formidable broadcaster. You were not there at the time, but you would have done the same as well. Just rehearsing, making sure that your senior commentators are there, making sure that the person who goes on air and announcing the passing of such a significant life is the one authorized to do that, so that you avoid this kind of social media frenzy and you avoid, turning such an important piece of news into an area of gossip and conjecture. So there are some really, set routines and shows and commentators and royal correspondents who will be speaking. I don't want to let out our broadcasting secrets because we still are competitors, but I think that all over the world, different broadcasters are descending on London and will cover the events as they unfold. The official program is public. Where the Queen will lie is also public. When her funeral will take place is also public. So the BBC is actually not unique in terms of its proximity because she was a global figure, and all broadcasters, all news channels are here to cover this moment.
Redi Tlhabi. Obviously, as we've seen over the last couple of days, there was a lot of political contestation within the UK. Are we going to see this time where politics takes a bit of a back seat, where the nation comes together, different political parties, all obviously coming together in mourning of the Queen, but also then in celebration of the new King?
You ask such a very interesting question because, of course, the Queen is not seen as a political figure. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but I heard your commentary before that she wasn't vociferous and outspoken in condemnation of colonialism. Well, she really couldn't, could she? She's a product of her time. And the British monarchy is so steeped in a painful history for us as Africans. I don't think that you would have the monarchy without colonialism. It's so much part of the British DNA. And to what extent did they apologize for that? I think that anybody with half a brain would say it's actually not enough, precisely because the ramifications of such a brutal period are still being felt in those countries that were impoverished and marginalized as a result of colonialism. But here's what I observe, that even political opponents, people who see themselves as adversaries, people who in everyday life are jostling for power and positions, when it comes to the monarchy, there is some sort of unity. There is some sort of unanimous voices. They come together because it's so much a part of their identity. I do think that people across the political spectrum, players who have been, as to just subvert each other's authority, get the upper hand, win public favor. When it comes to the Queen, I get the sense that they do coalesce around the figure that she was and what it means for British life. I think at this point what will happen is what we in Sesotho or Setswana say, marumo fatshe. I think they will tone down the rhetoric. I think whether it is about the fallout on Brexit, the cost of living, which is a big, big issue here in Britain. I mean, the cost of living, energy prices, that is what people are preoccupied with. But I will be bold enough to guess that at this moment, going forward for the next few days, they will remember that they are first and foremost British. They will coalesce around the symbolism of the Queen. They will think about what brings them together as people. And she was popular. She was a popular monarch. She was very popular, and also her age. I think there's something that softens when you look at a lady who has defied all eras, defied all sorts of health concerns, and died at age 96. And it is actually proper in terms of the culture here that the Queen is not seen to be political in any way. And I suppose that's a good thing, precisely because the administrations have changed and there's been so much political turmoil and instability in the last couple of years. But just to go back to the point and answer your question more precisely, that at this point they will transcend the political divisions and embrace what the Queen represented to this nation.
Yeah. How important, really, was the fact that just 2 days ago, she insisted on carrying out that final constitutional duty of appointing the new Prime Minister, albeit that she, of course, had to break with tradition and travel to Scotland for it to be done. But she still felt that she herself needed to do that, even at her age, and I could imagine she was already not feeling well.
Of course, she was confirming the appointment of Liz Truss, who was appointed by the Conservative Party and not even the voters. That will happen later. The Queen was already in Balmoral resting and would have ordinarily travelled to Buckingham Palace to, perform that official duty. But because of ill health, she couldn't do it, so they travelled to her. I think that is exactly why, I'm linking this question to your previous question, that is exactly why she is so popular, that she is seen as somebody who responds to duty. She's seen as somebody who will basically jettison her own comforts in order to respond to what the nation needs at that time. She's a symbol of continuity, a symbol of stability, and that's why she is greatly admired. Perhaps for you and I, it's not even a big deal. I know there are people who have quite some antipathy towards the monarchy for valid reasons. And for us, as former colonized nations, I think it is justified to really zone in with precision on the political prism and talk about the damage that was done to so many weaker nations and the lack of accountability. That is an important theme, and we have every right to delve into that. But life is complicated. There are so many layers, and truth itself is contested. And for this particular moment, her availing herself 48 hours ago to perform national duty will go down well with the British public that is weary, that is buckling under the pressure of the cost of living, and she is seen as a stabilizing force. And also, we Africans like to be very hard on ourselves, and perhaps we should be, but there's been a lot of turmoil and a lot of instability here in the UK. Bad leadership, mendacity and lies by the previous leader who's really gung-ho and likes to be a performer. I think wherever Boris Johnson is, he regrets not being in that seat, as he may have relished the idea of announcing the passing of the Queen. Be that as it may, I do think that her being available was actually indicative of her regard for her role, of her regard for her position. And I think for Liz Truss too, it was a significant moment that the Queen pitched, as it were. Britain could not afford another minute of this kind of leadership void, because we know that Boris Johnson announced that he was stepping down about 2 months ago. And we all thought 2 months being led by somebody who is outgoing. How can a nation move forward? How can the business of running the country go forward? How can the institutions continue to demonstrate stability and decisive leadership when they've got an outgoing leader and they are in limbo? So I think that approbation, that affirmation was very necessary, so that Liz Truss really has the authority to immerse herself in the demands of that position and do so immediately and with urgency.
Redi Tlhabi, once again. Part of the discussions that we had seen over the last few years was about the relevance of the British monarchy. Now that the Queen has unfortunately passed on, are we likely to see that debate coming up again, where where people are once again questioning whether or not the relevance of this institution, of this firm, in modern day society is something that we need as part of us?
So here's the thing, that this is my impression, of course, we're doing opinion and commentary and analysis. I think that the world loves the monarchy. It may just be fashionable and perhaps a sign of I don't know, being progressive, to be critiquing and scrutinizing the monarchy. But I do think that the world is obsessed with leadership and hierarchy. My impressions of people all over the world is that we love leaders. They love to have symbols and leadership. We just had the coronation in South Africa of the Zulu king. I'm not a Zulu, I'm not a monarchist, but even I was glued to my screen, because there is something that is much bigger than just politics. It is the performance of tradition. It is the performance of history and culture. It is the colorfulness of the singing and the ceremonies. That's just the perhaps superficial bits, but they speak to a nationhood and national identity. At a political level, I mean, who's that person who's going to decimate the monarchy and an age-old institution. Who is that person who will do away with the monarchy? I'm looking at a whole lot of political leaders who walk the corridors of power in the House of Commons at Westminster. They defer to the Queen. The national anthem of this country is about God Save the Queen. So to get rid of the monarchy, you would have to undo so many intricate layers of British society, so many intricate layers of the global society. And by that, I mean the Commonwealth of Nations. We don't need to delve into that long history, but I think our viewers will appreciate and know the whole history of the Commonwealth, many other areas. So I'm just saying that some debates are great to have, and some debates for people like you and I, whose job it is to question, whose job it is to say we are all equal before the law. But I think that's theoretical. We do know that in practice, some are more equal than others, and people like symbols of leadership. So I don't think that that debate has any muscle at all. I don't think that it is being approach with due consideration for what it would take to undo the monarchy. And I think it has not been tested. It's just that often opposition voices or rebellious voices are louder, and we in the media are guilty perhaps of following through every time there is heated rhetoric. But when you look at the granular details of what the slogans are calling for, you will find that it is not doable. I do not see this society deciding to undo the legacy of the monarchy. I don't see them. The very fact, let me just use a very superficial example. The very fact that even the great-grandchildren of the Queen are followed everywhere. I mean, that little baby, what's his name again? George, Prince William's son, when he was yawning at the tennis at Wimbledon, when he was pulling his hair and doing stuff. I mean, the media were like children, just literally obsessing over what a little boy was doing what little boys do everywhere, just being restless and not wanting to sit in the sun. But that very obsession even with the royal family, I think that even for those who want to do with the monarchy, if they were to admit it to themselves, they'd love to hate them, but it's great to have them there, not only because they bring in tourism, they bring in the news, but they keep the masses and the chattering classes chattering indeed. And of course, I mentioned something that is not insignificant, the tourism aspect. I mean, the royal family brings in billions in tourism for the UK, and with these turbulent economic times, that may be much needed. So yeah, I'm waffling a bit on this answer, but I just think that it's a nice conversation to get into, and those of us who want to question everything, just enjoy it. We want to challenge authority, but I do think that we're not taking into account what the Queen, what the monarchy itself means to British people.
All right, one last question from me out, Redi. I know that we've kept you on a little bit longer than what we should. But let's talk about what we can expect, I think, over the next few days, just in terms of national life within England. We've already reported on this side that the cricket match between South Africa and England has already been cancelled. So I could imagine that there's going to be a lot more cancellations, a lot more postponements of events and of life happening over the next 10 days or so. Can you tell us about what your anticipation is of the next few days in terms of just, will pubs be closed, for instance, in terms of mourning? Because we know that you guys love pubs over there.
I love how you say you guys, like I'm not one of you. Hey, I'm not British. I'm a girl from Orlando East. Look, the Brits love their beer. I don't see that happening, hey? I don't see them shutting pubs. They'll probably use them as public places where people can come together. I mean, I just remember the Queen's Jubilee in May. You couldn't get through at Buckingham Palace. You couldn't get through. Public spaces were just so occupied, also indicative of the fact that the monarchy is loved and celebrated. But I do think that there will be, of course, there will be a special sitting of the at Westminster, the House of Commons. Liz Truss will probably make some more. I am wondering what will happen with the schools. In fact, before I spoke to you, I was on my email trying to see whether my children's schools has sent a message that schools will be closed. And it was school holidays up until Monday. Monday, life began here. The summer holidays officially ended. So if this had happened last week, I think that a whole lot of people would have stayed at home. I do suspect that this is such a big moment that people there'll be public places opening. The Church of England will get involved. There'll be public spaces being made available in the same way that we had with Nelson Mandela, where he was there was an opportunity to write in the book, to observe the moment, to be at the Union buildings and so on. So I do think that there'll be many more public spaces that are made available for people to just walk in solidarity, I suppose, with the royal family, but also to express their loss. As for things like, I don't know how many of you love soccer, the calendar, the soccer calendar, the Premiership calendar. I don't know what it looks like, but I imagine things like those will come to a standstill. Theatre is a very big thing here in the UK. I don't see how there's going to be this kind of celebratory mood in the context or in the midst of the descent. A friend of mine used that word, the ascent of Liz Truss and the descent of Queen Elizabeth. In the context of all of that, I don't see that happening. Another thing that is important politically that will be interrupted. Remember, Liz Truss announced her cabinet almost 48 hours ago. They had their first cabinet meeting yesterday morning at 8:30. And I think there's so many programs that the new cabinet secretaries were going to delve into. I think the business of government will come to a standstill for a little while, and things will pick up again after.
Aswini, we're going to let you go. I know you've really indulged us. We appreciate it, and thank you very much. I know you like to look at media, you like to look at headlines, you read into what the headlines say, and you get some analysis. So the Daily Mail just wrote about a couple of hours ago, Prince Harry arrives in Balmoral more than an hour after the Queen's death was announced, and he joins other senior royals, but Meghan stays in London. I don't know, should we read anything into that?
Oh, they're just a nasty bunch, these British media. I mean, for goodness sake, the obsession with Meghan, and they are so acerbic and so unnecessarily mean-spirited. It is just so mean. It is unnecessary. She is criticized for absolutely nothing. She can just breathe, and they will be at her, and they will be criticizing her. I think there's a lot of racism. There's a lot of, she's not one of us. And she dared to defy protocol by walking away, because nobody walks away from the royal family. And this is in keeping with the themes that you were asking me earlier about how the royal family is regarded. They love to hate them, but they actually love them. And anybody who stands up against them is being victimized. I just think that the British media's obsession with Meghan is absolutely unhealthy. They need to have far more respect for themselves. They need to tone down on the mean spirit. There is so much dysfunctionality in British society, like everywhere else. Like we have in South Africa, the US has its own problems. They've got enough problems without victimizing Meghan and making her the receiving end of their venom and their hostility. I don't know what the hell they think she did to them, but they must let this beautiful, talented girl just breathe. She's not Kate, and I don't think she wants to be Kate. They must just leave her alone. Don't they have better things to do on the day that the Queen has died and they're still obsessing over Meghan? She spoke her truth. She made her choices. Just respect her choice and move on. They're so mean. Mean, mean, mean.
Really appreciate it. Thank you very much for coming on tonight.